Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0. Welcome back to the channel. Enjoy the fanfic. And let's begin. Part 2. Throne. Crows wheeled overhead in morning light as the Battle of the Blackwater drew to a painful, vicious end. Lannister men fought and died like dogs in the streets and alleys of King's Landing. Not lions. Dogs. The defenders had fought long into the night, and now, as morning came, as the sun cast its bloody rays upon the Red Keep, they fought harder still. A brave few ferociously fought to the last and died valiantly for their efforts. Others turned their cloak and turned on their fellows in the hopes of being spared by the invaders. Still, a great many more, including women and children, took heel and fled, quitting the city altogether. Those sorry souls would live to tell of this dark day, spread tales of the night that the lion fell. Baratheon, Stark, Tyrell. Three great houses laid claim to this task, united in one common purpose, one goal. The last time such forces came together, the mighty Targaryens themselves were laid low. By themselves, separate, any one of them would have surely failed against the Lannisters. Stannis Baratheon possessed a singular drive, but faced a difficult siege. Robb Stark had too few men. Mace Tyrell was entirely too cowardly and afraid to halt the Red Keep alone. Yes, alone, any one of them would have surely had a hard time of it, perhaps even failed in the undertaking. Together, however, more than 100,000 men surged into King's Landing and laid into it from within and without. Unprepared for such an halt, and with word of the king's abrupt nation spreading like the very wildfire wielded against them, many began to lose hope. The moment the gates were breached, they abandoned it altogether. The wise and cowardly fled. Those men brave of foolish enough to stand their ground were mowed down on spear and sword in turn, as were those who ordered them to their deaths. For we know the fate of tyrants and those who serve them, do we not? They come crashing down. For King Joffrey. Robb Stark barely heard the defender's terrified cry as he stormed the steps to the Red Keep. A single guard dared to bar his path. Eyes half crazed with fear, sword quivering in his hands, armor loose and ill-fitting, the boy looked every like he'd been pressed into service only days if not hours before the siege had begun. And that had been hours ago. No, with anger in hand and wrath blazing in his heart, he wasn't hearing much at all. Roaring, he lunged under the next man's desperate swing, parried the next wild sweep with the back of his hilt, and gutted him like a pig. For a fleeting, pivotal moment the guard hung on the end of his sword, gurgling in distress, his mouth a bloody orifice of agony. Then Robb ripped his weapon free with a vicious yank, leaving the Lannisters' entrails to spatter the stairs in grisly red relief, a discarded canvas left to rot. He didn't linger to hear the man's last words, or even watch him bleed out. He was already moving on up the stairs, cutting the next man down. Cries went up from those behind him. The king in the north. Robb didn't want to hear the words. But he did. He heard them. Heard it all. The young wolf tried to ignore the halt on his senses. The sound of angry crows wheeling overhead, vicious dark shapes in the waxing light of the rising sun, the ascent of fire and smoke, the screams as Stannis and Mace Tyrell sacked the city through nigh and well into the morning. It had been a long and brutish night. Those few who surrendered when the gates fell had been spared. The remaining defenders, and there were many, were still putting up a fight, fighting them block by city block. Thus far, he'd put nearly every one of them to the sword. In this matter at least, he proved partially successful. But try as he might, he couldn't blot the sights out. Women were taken, men slaughtered, children wept. The Lannisters had brought this upon themselves. Robb hardened his heart and willed himself to press onward, to not care for the plight of those around him. They'd brought this upon themselves for their defiance. Stannis had honored his word and more to deliver him here. No promises had been made for the populace. This was not his fault, he told himself. He was not to blame, and he'd no men to spare in their defense. He could only end their suffering by finishing this battle, once and for all. Of course, to do that, he had to find Stannis's man in all this chaos. The soon-to-be king's instructions had been almost painfully vague on that matter, but they'd at least provided him with a guideline. Head for the throne. So he'd made for the Red Keep. It was here that his true goal awaited, and it was here that the fighting was at its absolute thickest. He'd cut down 10 men so far and the defenders showed no sign of slowing or stopping. Perhaps in knowing that the city was lost and reinforcements denied them, they'd gone mad. Or mayhaps they simply intended to take as many men with them as they could before they fell. Whatever the case, they fought like men possessed, screaming and shouting to the last. And so Robb fought. Grey Wind at his right and flanked by his most trusted men, he ran headlong into battle, and damned be the consequences. Once, such a position would have been reserved for Theon Greyjoy. A loyal and trusted friend. A brother in arms. But Theon had betrayed him, a debt that would be paid in full, and that spot was left empty. So he fought alone, dread coiling in his heart like an angry snake. A spearman charged him and was summarily intercepted by Roose Bolton, his weapon shattered like kindly. Before long, his body matched that of his broken lance. Robb stepped over his corpse and pressed on, fierce and dauntless in the face of the enemy. Now his only thoughts were dark ones, haunting each step. Battlelust was well and truly upon Robb now. He had never fought with such ferocity in his life. Soldiers fought and died around him, but he scarcely noticed their ping and barely felt a thing. He saw his father's death when he closed his eyes to blink. Images of Sansa or Arya suffering such a fate or worse haunted him like his own shadow. No, he couldn't bear the thought of it. To come so far, only to lose them, merely thinking of it threatened to shatter him so utterly that he'd never recover. Grey Wind worried at a man's throat, his muzzle coming up red. The next to rush him met a similar fate, torn apart and cast aside like rotten meat. Before long, it began to seem as if their group was the only invading party present in the Red Keep at all. The dull crunch of bone meeting metal said otherwise. Gah! In the next instant, a severed head came careening around the corner. One of the men wasn't quick enough, and the flying projectile smashed him in the gut, flinging him down in a heap before caroming off a wall to land at Robb's feet. Helmet and all, visage frozen in a rictus of shock and fear, the face gawped up at the young wolf, as though the defender were truly startled to see him. After a moment's disgust, the Stark edged it away with his boot. Wary, the young wolf edged around the corner. Is that all you've got? And found a pair of men were engaged in rigorous combat, not with each other, but with half a dozen Lannister men. 3. As axe and dagger met in a man's flesh. Whomever these men were, they clearly knew how to fight. The one wielding daggers better than most. Parrying one blade, he lashed out with another, Valyrian steel crashing harshly against crude iron. A flourish of a riposte ripped the man's weapon free and buried the second dagger hilt deep in the defender's chest. In the same motion he swept the legs of his other attacker and sent him crashing to the floor in a heap of frenzied curses and thrashing limbs. By then a third foe was upon him, and his valiant efforts secured him a vicious strike to the face that left him gurgling blood and teeth. Daggers fell, and the man gurgled no more. A knife took him in the back, drawing a strangled snarl from the inn. Before his final victim could recover, the masked man pounced, tackling him to the ground and holding him fast. Writhing around the thrashing man, he wrapped an arm around his throat, keeping his victim locked in an iron grip until their struggles ceased entirely. Just like that, 3 men were dead at his hands, and he seemed no worse for the wear. Ha! A young voice crowed within the mask, that's 50. Aye, we'll see. The giant beside him, for what else could one possibly call this great Goliath of a man? Fought just as ably with sheer force. Blades bounced off the brute's thick armor with a thunderous clang, heralding a deathly knell for their wielders. A large hand out with frightening speed, crushing a Lannister's throat and casting him aside into his fellows. They clamored to right themselves, but too slowly. With a mighty grunt, the Miv man's right arm arced back to heft an axe of gigantic proportions, bringing it to bear upon the unfortunate guards. A single stroke of that fell weapon and the remainder fell, their heads caved in like rotten fruit. And just like that the brawl was over, and the pair were left standing bloody, triumphant. "I think," the masked one said after a moment, "I won our little contest, Ulrich." The larger one exchanged a glance with his shorter companion and promptly burst into bountiful laughter. "Oh, those last one made 51 for me. I killed a king. He's worth more points." "That you did." It was surreal, watching them bicker over such astronomical kill counts. And what was this about a king? Had the short one killed Joffrey? Given that display just now, it was certainly possible. Whomever they were, they did not wear Lannister colors, those of Mace or Stannis or even those of his own men. Indeed, their uniform black vestments identified them as nothing and no one. Robb drew up short at the sight of them, uncertain of what to do, whether to attack or call out. Were these the allies Stannis had spoken of? They seemed more ins and sell swords than actual soldiers. Decency demanded that he make his presence known, yet this was war, and any men who gloated over such death were sure to be a. In the end, that choice was made for them. Robb must have made a sound of some sort, because those blue eyes cut towards him with a sharp hiss. "Dibs. I saw him first." Quick as AW, the giant surged forward. Startled, his men took to their heels and tried to seek solid ground, but they were still on the stairs, and with so many there was nowhere to retreat to beyond the crowded well they'd just existed. Robb swore and raised his sword. Hold. As swiftly as the man's ult had begun, so too did it end. The one in black lowered his hand, the outlines of a frown forming behind the dark cloth masking his face. Slowly, like a rolling boulder, the giant drew backwards. His masked ally strode forwards, uncaring of the dozen blades pointed at him. He seemed to spring with every step, practically vibrating with boundless energy. Whether his blood was simply up, or something far darker was afoot, he knew not. Only that he had a very, very, very bad feeling about this. "What have we here?" the inn asked, flicking a dagger back into his belt. "Those aren't Lannister colors, and you certainly aren't Kingsward." No, I think aha." A hand scissored towards Ruse, and just like that the inn was off, arrowing towards the frowning man. "You. I know you. I remember you." That masked head tilted, regarding him coolly. "How's Ramsay?" Question mark quote. Robb had seldom seen the infamous Roose Bolton at a loss for words, but this was clearly one of them. It was almost amusing, really. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure, sir." "Not a sir." The inn chuckled. "There was that time when I ran away from home way back when, and meh, you know what?" "Forget I said anything," a hand waved dismissively, banishing common sense and leaving utter chaos in its place. "Happened a long time ago, doesn't matter now." He must have seen Robb winding up to speak, too, because those gloved fingers slashed imperiously through the air. Right. You. Don't start talking. Wait a minute, there." Abruptly, his ice blue eyes slid eastward to Robb's right. "Is that a wolf? A dire wolf?" He became visibly excited at the word, eyes brightening. "It is, isn't it?" "Bah." The giant snorted. "That one's just a pup." Gray wind his head aside, puzzled as the stranger attempted to pet it. Oddly enough, the direwolf allowed him this. The beast didn't even growl. It was a strange, almost tender moment, and Robb couldn't bring himself to understand half of what was going on. Then, incredibly, the wraith paused to regard Robb anew, straightening up. "You're Robb Stark, aren't you?" Slightly undone by the untoward greeting, the Lord of Winterfell balked. "And you are." A bark of laughter answered the young wolf. "You don't recognize me, either, do you?" Ulrich rumbled. "Hard to forget your ugly mug." "What? Perhaps this will help." A hand reached up, tugging away the thick black fabric binding the young man's visage. Exposed were blue eyes the color of endless oceans and wild, flame-like hair. Whiskered cheeks pinched in a slight smile, and oddly enough Rob found himself struck by the faintest sense of nostalgia. A fragment of memory pricked at him like an angry thorn, demanding his attention. He had seen this man, somewhere before. Once, when he was very young. But when had he? Really? The unfeigned hurt. Does no one remember me? You're killing me, here. Breaking my heart. Ah, whatever. I'm Naruto, since you've obviously forgotten who I am. The killer in black introduced himself with a graceless, shallow bow, shattering his thoughts. No surname. His head jerked toward the giant at his left, as Ulrich, but I call him the Boulder. White teeth flashed at the giant. I dare say he's earning his namesake, Ulrich loomed over Rob, considering the young wolf with dark eyes. Thought you'd be older, boy, he said at last. Rob bristled angrily. I'm not a boy. Bah. Naruto gave a sudden bark of laughter. You are a boy, he said derisively. The word emerged as a strangled snarl as he plucked the blade from his back, uncaring of the bloody mess he made in doing so. That's going to sting. Ruse arched an eyebrow. You should get that scene too. What? This? Nah, I've had worse. I'll be fine. Now, then, hands clapped, he spun back to face them, looking every inch the madman Rob secretly suspected him to be. I have gifts for you lot. Ulrich. At his command the giant stepped forward and knelt, unlimbering the larger parcel on his back. Rob had first assumed it to be a rod of some sort, wrapped in thick cloth, mayhap a weapon he no longer used. It wasn't until the Umber unwrapped the opaque shroud that he saw its sheath of wolf hide, and it was then that he well and truly recognized the large shape wrapped within. It was a weapon he'd seen countless times before in his youth, he'd even experienced the pleasure of holding it, once. His heart leapt into his throat. I always respected your father. Naruto confided in a quiet voice, his expression stoic as the young Stark accepted the Miv blade. He was a good man, a decent man, and better than most. It makes sense that his sword should fall to you. Besides, he flashed a roguish grin, it's not the size of the weapon that matters, So you use it. Now then, he turned, facing an adjacent corridor, if my lord will follow me to the throne room, perhaps we can talk all about your sister. Sister. The young wolf seized on the word. Sister. Not plural. 7 hells, what now? Follow, then, if you want answers. I don't have time to stand around. Hey. It made for a rather odd and amusing argument, all things considered. Naruto hadn't stopped walking, and in his brisk pace nearly left Rob behind. In the end the young wolf was forced to vigorously hasten after him while holding ice, lest he seem a fool in front of his men thanks to this impudent, flame-haired youth. This was made all the more awkward by Ulrich's looming presence over his shoulder. The giant looked like he wanted to split him in two at the slightest provocation, and just might, given the chance. That Roose Bolton and his men might be present to witness the entire debacle was embering enough. Grey Wind kept up with the pair ably, loping beside the whiskered one with ease. Just who was he? Do you treat all lords this way? He asked at length. Only the ones I like. The whiskered warrior laughed hoarsely. Rob didn't stop glowering. There it is, there's the look I remember. His host cried, grinning at his brooding. You're so damned suspicious. I love it. My men have scoured the city from top to bottom, but we haven't been able to locate Arya. Was that the faintest note of apology, laced in the murderer's tone just now? Or was he imagining things? Sansa, however, Naruto continued with a growl, is here and has been absolutely miserable thanks to Joffrey. I'll be happy to bring her to personally you once we've cleared the keep. Momentarily taken aback, Rob blinked. He'd expected some resistance, not this. And the Kingslayer. I've killed enough Lannisters for one day. Keep him for now, if you like. Naruto scoffed. Or don't. Doesn't matter to me. Now suspicions warred with outright anxiety. This was too easy. It had to be a trap. Had to be. If you're holding out on us. As I said, an irritated Naruto frowned, his gentle voice turning sharp, your precious will be delivered to you at the first opportunity, despite that wholly unnecessary threat just now. As I was saying. I say, wait. A man in resplendent armor hurried around the corner before he could finish, moving with great speed. Rob thought he might crash into the wall, but no, he slowed at the last moment. He didn't recognize the man, not with his helmet down, but the crest he bore was distantly familiar. Was that the mark of Highgarden on his shield? As if to confirm those very suspicions, the man opened his visor to the world, revealing a handsome face that many a man in King's Landing would swoon for. Robb Stark was not one of those men. Naruto, however, afforded the knight a grim smile. Sir Loris. The Knight of Flowers looked to be quite out of breath, but straightened up admirably. We've secured the safe room in the eastern stair. He announced grimly, looking as though he'd just eaten something foul. It was as you said, the defenders were stretched too thin to make a difference. The keep is ours, as are the hostages. Robb didn't miss the subtle mention, there. Just how closely were the Tyrells allied with Stannis? Had they entered into a formal alliance after all? Loris's expression didn't seem to indicate as much, but who knew? This was precisely why he preferred the north. Less politics than the south by far. Well done. Naruto conceded with a curt nod. Now, my lords, this way, if you please. Robb consented to follow, but still one question niggled at him. How'd you do it? He had to know. Simple. Came he reply. Oh, never underestimate 20 good men. As though proof of those very words, their small company was met with a score of armed mercenaries just outside the door to the Iron Throne, none of them looking altogether pleasant. What was this? A double cross? Indeed, not a one of them appeared pleased by the new arrivals. Perhaps it was the stress of war. Mayhap it was the tension. Or maybe he simply didn't trust the beguiling manner of this strange inn. Whatever the case, Robb very nearly drew his weapon, and likely would have, had not Naruto thrust himself between them. Sorry. The blonde apologized amicably. My men don't much like the nobility in these parts. Come on, you lot, make way for our guests. Ulrich, Eleanor, with me. At his command the unruly mob parted, though not without some lingering glances. A woman with striking red hair peeled away from the group and moved to flank Naruto, her piercing green eyes cutting into him. Robb felt his hand linger on Ice's hilt. He would be glad to find his sisters and quit the South altogether, put it behind him and pretend that this mess never happened in the first place. Of course he could never do that. Never forget. The North remembered, and so did he. He would always remember. Always. Well, then, one hand braced itself against the doors. Robb paused just long enough to wonder what that stench was, but by then it was already too late. Behold, my lords. Naruto grinned wolfishly and swung the door open wide. Welcome. Robb froze. Loris gagged. Joffrey and Tommen's severed heads were the very first thing they saw upon entering. The boys' faces thrust before them on a pair of spikes like some profane offering, petrified in their last glimpse's horrified life. Their final expressions spoke volumes to their final fates. One of them was even missing an eye. Gods above. And there, further back, clad in a red guard's cloak and chained before the very throne that had caused the Stark family such untold misery. By the gods. He breathed. If Naruto heard the muttered oath, he didn't show it, nor did his smile lessen. I do hope you like the accommodations. Cersei Lannister merely whimpered and turned her head away at their approach. Robb recognized her, if only by her face. In the time since he'd seen her last, someone had stripped away that overbearing arrogance that so defined her, and its place lay a broken shell of a woman. Her hair had suffered untold horror as well. They'd taken a razor to her golden curls, and they hadn't done a very good job of it, leaving them boyishly short. She looked like she wanted to crawl into a hole and die. Sadly, their host wasn't having that. In a few swift strides he crossed the room and took hold of her, forcing her out of her despondence. The chain itself allowed the queen enough slack to move away from the steps, but the shackles still held her fast to the throne itself. It was a punishment as cruel as it was violent, but Rob found himself too bitter to consider her modesty. Naruto, even less so. I apologize for her state of undress, he remarked flippantly, touching a rough hand to her face. One of my boys had the bright idea to strip her and parade her before the men. In the middle of a bloody battle, the idiot. A slender arm waved towards a broken body near one of the pillars. Such a pity. He was a good hand and an able sword, but I couldn't have him disobeying my commands out of petty vengeance. Now, he announced, spinning on a heel and spreading his arms, I believe that my lady has something to tell milords. Who let Ned Stark die? Cersei grit her teeth. Perhaps I was too kind. Naruto bared his own in a smile far too false for Rob's liking. Now, I'll ask it again. Who let Ned Stark die? Stubbornly, she held her tongue. I can just as easily ask Myrcella. The inn continued with silken menace. I'm sure she would be happy to oblige me. The lie came easy to him, and it made Cersei quail. He wouldn't target Myrcella. She wasn't a threat and he wasn't about to go to Dorne just to spite one woman. Moreover, Myrcella held no part in any of his plans. The Martells could keep her and she could grow old and die there for all he cared. Cersei did not, however, know this, and didn't have to. She need only fear what he might do to her only living child. And sure enough, the queen crumbled. I did. She answered in a small voice. Good girl. And your brother. Cersei spat in his face. For a terrifying moment Rob thought Naruto was going to murder her right then and there and deny him his justice. What he did next boggled the mind. Slowly, painfully, the flame-haired youth reached up and wiped the spittle away from his face. Then, smiling, he placed a tender kiss on her forehead. Shame, 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 he chanted softly, shaking his head. What a shame. At least I'm honest with myself. I may be a bastard, but at least I'm an honest one. I know who I am. Not that I'm judging you, mind. I'm not. We love who we love and damned be the consequences. You're just paying for them a bit earlier than most. A pat on her cheek and he moved past, striding towards the Iron Throne with determination in his steps and bitter purpose in his gaze. With a grunt, he flung himself down onto it. The very act itself smacked of contempt. Don't mind me. He chided at their questioning stares. Just keeping it warm for awe. Abruptly, the doors parted in admittance once more, this time for an even larger contingent of men, stomping loudly. Rob recognized at once the distinctive colors of Stannis's men and sure enough, their leader stood at their head, armed and armored. His own men were all too easily swept away and aside into room, pressed towards the walls for lack of vehement protest. Naruto straightened at length and finally stood, relinquishing his hold on the throne and descending the steps at a brisk walk. The indifferent mask he'd once worn all but dissolved into a triumphant grin with a cry of, "You made it!" Stannis paused just long enough to take in Joffrey and Tommen's severed heads, to see Cersei's weeping form chained to the Iron Throne. He didn't smile. That grim look persisted until he reached Naruto. What relation did the inn have to the king? And then, to his great surprise, the younger man seized him in a fierce embrace. Stannis stiffened momentarily, relaxing only once he realized he wasn't in danger. Rob watched this strange scene with no small amount of curiosity, anxiety lurking in the shadow of his thoughts. You've been busy, he said by way of greeting at last. Naruto stepped aside, bowing deeply. Your throne awaits. Stannis gazed past the boy, his dark eyes inscrutable, face carefully blank. Then, as if in a dream, he moved past him and began to climb the steps. All present, Stark, Baratheon and Tyrell, found themselves helpless to look away, stricken spellbound by the sight. Naruto preened quietly as he watched his sire make the climb short, though it was with a strange, morbid fascination. He, and everyone present, recognized the significance of this crucial, pivotal moment. They were witnessing the birth of a new king. Perhaps even a new dynasty. Rob found himself looking on with a strange, icy dread as Stannis reached the summit. He'd sworn fealty to this man. What would it cost him? The last time any Stark had come this far north in service to a Baratheon, his father had been killed, and his brother and father before him. Was he fated to suffer the same? All these thoughts and more swirled through the young wolf's head, roaring like a winter storm. And still Stannis held his ground, hovering over the Iron Throne. No, wait, he was turning. Then slowly, regally, he lowered himself into it. A moment of precious silence followed. Rob took it in, observing the reaction of those around him. Naruto was grinning wildly. Loras looked positively rigid. Ruza's face was one of careful indifference, not quite that of diffidence, but something else. The way his gaze strayed to Naruto made him wonder if the Bolton truly did know the inn after all. Then Stannis Baratheon, first of his name, exhaled wearily, capturing his attention once more. It is done. Loras hissed in an angry breath at those words, at the sight of Renly's killer, sitting so smug and content upon the Iron Throne. The same throne that had cost Renly his life in the end. All because of this man. Stannis. Damn him to the darkest hell. Made all the more heated by the thought of what was come tomorrow, he longed to act. Marjorie would be made to marry the son of this insufferable bastard, a son no one knew of, and the very notion enraged him all the more. His beloved sister, in the bed of a killer's son. Not if he had any say in it. He had to do something. He would do something. This was it. His moment. He could end it all with a single stroke of the sword. A hand twitched toward that very blade, and froze. Somehow in that instant, that second, that sliver of time, Naruto's gaze met his. Something compelled the Tyrell to look, and what he saw there terrified him. Go ahead. He mouthed the words, smiling pleasantly. Give me an excuse. Those cold blue eyes were like shards of sapphire, stabbing at him, daring Loras to make the attempt. His smile was a slow one, the smile of a reaper. Was he quick enough? Better than him? Could he succeed? Loras hesitated a moment longer, then thought better of it. If he struck here and now, he'd be cut down in an instant. No, his vengeance would keep for another day. It took all he had to straighten and maintain the mask of civility once more. How went the battle? He ventured through gritted teeth. Our forces crushed the last of the defenders nearly an hour ago. Stannis answered, answering in his own gruff, insufferable way. Tywin Lannister may yet attempt to retake the city, but with his precious legacy so endangered, he won't dare attack. He seemed to realize the effects his own words were having on his audience, for he permitted himself a rare smile. Whatever he attempts, it won't be a direct alt. The day is ours, then. Naruto grinned. It is, son. With those 3 words, Loras felt his world shatter. Son, send some of your lot down into the city to stop the looting. Then find someplace to clean yourself up. He spoke at great length. I'll summon you when it's time. And I expect you to be on your best behavior. Naruto stiffened in the corner of their eyes, the fire in his face growing dim indeed. It was a startling change from the raving madman he'd been mere moments before. Then incredibly, he bowed. As you say. Loras felt himself to be on the verge of stabbing Stannis once more, but restrained himself. Naruto. This heathen, this savage, this accomplished killer of men, was going to be his brother. By law, he could see the resemblance now, that face, those burning blue eyes. That fierce drive, a willingness to kill at the drop of a hat, and oh gods, his sister would be sleeping with him. 7 hells. What had he gotten himself into? Some days later, Tyrion hadn't expected to wake. Indeed, he hadn't expected to wake up at all. He had been prepared for the cold embrace of death, braced himself for the sting of a blade or worse. Not some knock on the head. Mercy of any sort, especially this sort, was almost completely lost on him. Any enemy soldier would have cut off his head. Yet here it was, still firmly on his shoulders. So when a torch waved before his eyes, its muted flame slowly drawing the dwarf from the depths of his slumber, Tyrion was almost startled. Really? So, alive, then. Even then, he wasn't sanguine about his certainly wasn't expecting to wake to a song of all things. For indeed, a man's voice crooned to him from beyond the torchlight, humming a tune he'd not heard before. Death, ah death, 'tis you I fear, won't you leave me be for another year? Bleary eyes narrowed, squinting against the light in the dark. Stop. He croaked, averting his gaze. Stop that, would you please? I have a terrible headache. What? An amused voice drawled. Do my dulcet tones not soothe you? Not at all, really. Ouch. Now Tyrion knew beyond a doubt, if not from the first moment he'd regained consciousness, who was holding that torch. This would end one of two ways. Dead, or trapped in this small room for the rest of his days. As such, he wasn't entirely surprised when the torchlight peeled away, revealing insufferable boy standing beyond, smiling softly. He was, however, startled to see the one beside him. For there, holding the very torch that blinded him so, was none other than Bronn. He exclaimed, gawking. What are you doing here? The man's silence was chilling, and so he asked instead, what happened? The sellsword held his tongue. Don't mind him, Naruto interjected proudly, pearly whites flashing in a disarming smile. He's still feeling just a tiny bit guilty about his part in all of this. I'll tell you what happened. Your bastard nephew, the mighty Joffrey Lannister, suffered a stunning defeat and death at the hands of the true king. My father. Well, my hands, really. He waved a gloved digit in masked delight. I had all the stabbing bits, remember? You've been out for most of it, since. I was afraid I'd hit you too hard, ya know. It's so hard to hold back when I'm in the moment. No, I mean, what is Bronn doing here? Tyrion interrupted with vitriol, jerking a manacled hand at Bronn. And why isn't he in chains? Why would he be in chains? Naruto answered with a long, drawn-out blink. He works for me and my father, now. What? It was in that moment that Tyrion Lannister truly understood how thoroughly he'd been screwed. Damn him. Damn that clever boy. Wait. He'd said father. Twice now. Stannis. Stannis. 7 hells. The boy was his son. Well, that certainly made things worse, much more so. Was he a bastard, then? Stannis didn't have fiery hair, despite his chosen sigil. Yes, it's all very shocking, I know. Naruto laughed, seeing his stricken expression. But you've been out for quite a while, Master Dwarf, 3 days to be exact. You'll find we've been very busy since then. I hope you like your bed. How? The word tasted like ash on Tyrion's tongue. But he had to know. Naruto blinked at the unspoken question, nonplussed. You didn't know. He wanted to know how they'd been undone. Of course he did. But would it be wise to tell him? It would only be salt in the wound. Tyrion growled. How? With patience and great difficulty. His captor confessed with a grim look. I was certain the spider would suss me out within the first week. You know, he nearly did once or twice, and I came close to having words with him. But your insipid sister isn't half as smart as she thinks she is, and my boys know how to keep a secret. Then there was the matter of my bloody temper. I nearly lopped off Joffrey's head before the appointed time. Then I had to follow you, see what you planned. After that, well, it just came together. You're not going to tell me, are you? The dwarf deadpanned. Blue eyes danced in the dark. You'd be amazed by what people hear these days, he answered cryptically. Tyrion fought the overpowering urge to spit at his so-called host. He'd suspected something to be amiss. Of course, the blonde's meteoric rise to power had been nothing short of astronomical. That was Cersei's fault, he supposed. His beloved sister, she was still alive, wasn't nearly half as smart as she claimed to be. But the fault lay with him for not acting sooner, for foolishly believing that the boy and his band of men weren't a threat. Thinking they were mere swords, grasping for coin and status in these dark times. But they'd been wrong. He'd been wrong. The boy had played them all. Now, here he was, chained to a wall. And with that, he suddenly realized he had to take a piss. Do you mind? Not at all. Naruto waved Bronn forward. Take your time. Tyrion stood and found both his limbs and bladder relieved in short order, but felt little relief for it. However fleeting such freedom might last, he knew it was meaningless within this cell. He'd been betrayed, no allies to speak of, and was wholly at the mercy of his captor. He'd been had, and quite spectacularly so. The knowledge that he'd failed to see it coming cut deeply. Somehow, Bronn's betrayal cut deeper still. Not quite a friend, but not a common sword either. His treachery hurt. Damn, but it hurt. I paid you a small fortune. A look of something resembling pity flashed across the man's face. You paid well. The sword shrugged amicably. Stannis's boy paid better, and I got to keep my head. A roguish grin followed, as he slid the torch into a holster on the wall. You still have yours, too. Seemed a fair deal at the time. A pause followed, and at Naruto's shrug, he added another tidbit of information. Your shit of a sister's in a cell somewhere down here, too, if it makes you feel any better. Tyrion blinked. It does actually. The thought of Cersei, raving and shrieking in one of the black cells was actually, rather entertaining. Certainly she deserved as much for being a wretched show and all the lives she'd ruined. But it was the unspoken words that rankled him so. Jaime, I cannot speak for him. Naruto answered gravely, his whiskered countenance adopting a stern, flinty expression. The Starks have him as their prisoner. Although, to Tyrion's great surprise, that grim look softened into something resembling genuine empathy. I believe a friend of yours would be heartened to know that you are well. Just then, Tyrion had an ugly thought. Instinctively, he denied it. I haven't the foggiest. A pained, tiny gasp almost went unheard in the dark beyond the door. Almost. But Tyrion heard it all the same, clear as day, and he felt positively wretched. Something broke, deep inside of him. Please, he begged, don't hurt her. What do you take me for, a savage? Naruto snarked, quietly amused in his mirth. I don't make it a habit to harm I mean, he hastened to amend at the angry glint in Tyrion's eye, those of the fairer. Turned, unbarring the door. I found her hiding with Sansa, and after she tried to knife me she demanded indeed, that she be taken to see you at once. So here she is. A gloved fist rapped swiftly and firmly against the door with great purpose once, twice, 3 times, and the lock turned with a creak of rusted hinges. Open, he commanded. The resultant light nearly blinded the dwarf. He squinted, glimpsing a group of perhaps a dozen or more standing beyond the black iron and pale stone before a shadow crossed the torches. A slim figure slipped in from the doorway, huge, beautiful eyes watchful. Naruto and Bronn made way for her without a word, the latter ignoring the vicious glower the maiden shot his way. She'd lost none of her fire, and it showed in the way that she spun to face his captor with a hiss. Whop! Naruto's head snapped aside as Shay's open palm struck the side of his face with all the force she could muster, visibly jerking his visage aside. Bronn laughed, incredulously. Tyrion didn't share the man's mirth. For a terrifying instant he thought his lover would perish then and there, gutted for her impudence and be left to bleed out in the black cells. Incredibly, she didn't. Because nothing happened. Joffrey's killer Mir shook his head, spat a bit of blood onto the stones, and sighed. Satisfied. What have you done to him? Shay hissed. I haven't done anything since I knocked him on the head. The inn replied flatly, idly maging his sore cheek as the angry woman stormed past him. No one's laid a hand on him since. Granted, though, I did hit him pretty hard. Whatever else he said seemed lost on Shay. She knelt before him, uncaring for the dirt and muck. Hands cupped his bruised face, drawing it to her own. Soft lips pressed against his forehead, then his lips, desperate to make certain he was truly there. An equally soft, sensual voice purred in his ear. "My lion." She cooed quietly, holding him close. "My poor, poor lion." Tyrion felt his heart wrench and shivered to his very soul. Alive. She was alive. Shay was alive. A thank you would be nice, ya know. Naruto quipped. "I didn't have to do all this for you." Tyrion stiffened. Ah, and now they came to the heart of the matter. The inn had gone out of his way to not only spare him but to allow him relative comfort at that. He had not been beaten or altered, and though the cell was indeed dank and dark, he had a cot of sorts to sleep in and a bucket by which to relieve himself. He'd even seen fit to deliver him his lover intact. Someone who would have made a fine bargaining C in the hands of any other. He'd shown him untold kindness where none was necessary. But was it truly kindness, or was it something else? What did he want? What did he have to gain for this facade? Why are you doing all this? Look, I'm going to be blunt, here. Naruto began slowly, having little patience for lies and half-truths now that the deed was done. My old man wanted ya dead on a matter of principle. I've convinced him otherwise. It wasn't easy, mind you. If I didn't respect you so damned much, I'd have let the men take your head. But I didn't, he continued, smiling in that odd way of his, for 2 reasons. First, you're damn clever. You might have caught me if you dug just a bit deeper. Secondly, you've a mind for these sort of things. You know how the game is played. So I offer you this choice. You can take your lover and board AS to Bravos right now, or you can leave this cell with her and begin your tenure as a proper hand of the king. In my father's service. The prince added, sounding inordinately pleased with himself. What say you? I, for one, cannot think of anyone better suited for the post. Accept it, and you'll leave this bloody cell right now and I'll return you to your quarters. Tyrion nearly guffawed. You can't be serious. Can't I? The fiery-haired youth tilted his head, looking like a curious fox, eyes gleaming in the torchlight. I can't be the hand. I'm the prince. Besides, it doesn't suit me. Davos was quite content to be master of S's at any rate once I suggested the matter to him. I'm inclined to let Varys remain in his post despite his actions. As for Littlefinger, I don't trust him for such a position, not one bit. And Pycelle is dead. Yes, don't look so pleased. Eleanor butchered him herself. We'll need a new Grand Maester, now, I suppose. Good of your El to do that. Bronn quipped. Keep her close. Naruto's smile collapsed like a rotten pigeon pie. She's not mine to keep, anymore, he said at last, snorting. And she'd kick your teeth in if she hears you say that. Probably would. The cell sort agreed. Feisty ones are always the best. Shay scoffed, drawing a melancholy look. I suppose. Neither made no remark for the prince's sullen expression. Didn't have to. Tyrion knew the look of heartbreak all too well. No, perhaps not heartbreak, but disappointment instead. Narrowing his gaze, he tried to remember who that had been. Eleanor. Eleanor, aha. Yes, she must have been the woman he'd seen Naruto with in the Red Keep. Pity. She'd seemed a nice enough sort, if a tad rough and willful in her mannerism. Naruto was more than rough, more than willful. He'd seen him carve through men like butter during the Battle of Blackwater, and knew it to be true that he enjoyed the act. Who knew how she'd reacted once she'd seen the truer side of him? Women often reacted poorly when they discovered something they didn't like. He supposed Naruto wouldn't take kindly to such advice, however, and he did owe him an answer besides. But what to say? Shay looked at him, her expression inscrutable. In that moment, Bravos was sorely tempting indeed, but the prospect of doing what he loved, what he was good at, that even more so. Stannis was a harsh man, but he'd always been an honest one, which was more than he could say for his lord father and his incessant schemes. Tywin would want his head for this regardless, in an event. Would he fare better across the narrow sea, or here in King's Landing? At length, he sighed. If I do this thing for you, if I accept my old post, he began slowly, measuring the inn's delighted expression with every word, I said if. His sharp voice brought the boy up short when he tried to speak. How do I know you won't have me killed as soon as I displease you? Naruto blinked. I never kill my friends. And are we friends? Tyrion probed, sitting up. I'd like to think I've been more of a friend to you than your twit of a sister. Naruto replied readily. The terms of this arrangement are simple. Never betray me, and I'll never betray you. Fair enough. Tyrion shrugged. I feel I should warn you. You're in the great game now, you know. I am. Naruto laughed. It was a bitter, ugly thing and it instantly set Tyrion on edge. And the great game is terrifying. But you needn't worry about me. Bronn. Azure Orb swept back to his guard. Escort Lady Shay out for a moment, will you? And close the door. The cell sword did as he was bade, much to Shay's great annoyance. You know, I've always liked games, the inn confessed after a long moment, crossing to the far side of the room. They're oh so fascinating. Dangerous sometimes, too. So is magic. Reaching across to the wall, he took a hold of the nearby torch and snuffed it out with a bare hand. The dwarf started in surprise, failing to understand what he had seen. The boy had simply closed his palm over the flame, and it guttered out like so much ash. Plunged into darkness, into silence, he found himself trying to understand the boy's brief bit of theatrics. All that remained was the muted light from the door, but despite the faint illumination, the room grew darker still. But unlike magic, a game is only dangerous, Naruto purred in the black, his voice darkening. Until someone smashes the board. His eyes flashed in the black, and his shadow seemed to writhe, becoming something monstrous, reflecting its owner's spirit. Then Naruto moved and the wall behind him shattered. Could light be black? He wondered if that were true. In that instant, as fresh light and dust spilled into the room, Tyrion couldn't stop gawping. Staring. All that remained there before him in the black were those eyes. Strangely enough, they weren't blue anymore. They were scarlet. Red as an ocean of blood. Those eerie, red eyes. What? Tyrion cleared his suddenly dry throat, looking up, and up to meet those still crimson eyes. Was that? Naruto smiled ruefully. I'll never tell. Opening parenthesis. Closing parenthesis. Tywin Lannister sat in cold, contemplative silence. His desk stood before in shoddy disarray, papers and correspondence ripped to pieces in a fit of rage. The anger had left him hours ago, cooling into a frigid lake of ice deep in his heart. The servants dared not disturb him. They knew all too well of his glacial rage, his apocalyptic fury. For fury he felt indeed fury at having been bested. Outmaneuvered. By the time he'd realized the Tyrell's treachery, it was already too late. He'd seen the sack of King's Landing, seen the fury of the wildfire firsthand as it was turned upon the very defenders themselves. Even then he'd still resolved to take back the city from Stannis at any cost, to attack, even if it meant death. It was only once he'd learned of his children's captured, when Stannis's soldiers started parading Joffrey and Tommen's heads about the battlements, that his will finally broke. The arrow to the knee certainly hadn't helped matters any. His forces routed, he'd retreated to the fortress of Castle Rock to lick his wounds and recover. The Lannister ancestral home felt hollow, somehow. Cold. Empty and cold as it had since Joanna's death. But no amount of injury, no matter how grave, could slake the hatred he felt for Stannis Baratheon. His brother Kevin was in charge for the time being, and he insisted that they wait until the men had recovered. Bah! The man had all the courage of a field mouse, sometimes. And now his spies told him that Tyrion would be named Hand of the King. Hand of the King, ally of the enemy, while his brother and sister languished in the black cells below. Just the thought of it was enough to make Stannis seethe. Stannis mocked him, even now. Dark thoughts loomed over him, black and ugly. If only there was a way to strike back at Stannis, to make him experience the pain and humiliation he felt now. Him and that bastard boy of his. He paused, considering them slowly. An idea came to him, then. An awful, terrible idea, wicked in its vindictiveness. It would take time, of course, a great deal of time. And coin. That as well. A Lannister always paid his debts, and he owed Stannis Baratheon a great deal. The lion would have its day. Opening parenthesis ... question mark closing parenthesis. Naruto whistled softly as he stared at the tiny creature before him. A dragon. An actual, living dragon. HSS's. He'd always wanted to see one, mere books didn't do them justice. They were fire-given flesh, creatures of life and destruction. All the glory and wonder of the world paled in comparison to them. Yet here one was, here before him. Distantly, it occurred to him that this might be another one of his dreams turned nightmare. They were seldom pleasant ones. But if this was indeed a dream, he resolved himself to make the most of it. The tiny black lizard crouched before him would become a mighty beast someday, but for the time being, it was just that, an infant. Years from now it would be much, much larger, able to snap him in half with a single bite. Judging by the way it was snarling at him, the little bugger was fixing on taking a piece out of him right now. Marveling at the little dragonling, he dared to open its cage and touch its back. His new friend didn't like that. Not one bit. Wow, he hummed, you're a fierce little guy, ain't ya? Drogon, how did he know his name? Hissed and nipped at his hand. The whiskered warrior laughed. Hungry, too. Then the little bastard opened his mouth and spat fire. Laughing, Naruto watched the tiny eddy of flame arc overhead, until an icy hand exploded through his chest. A voice like death hissed in his ear. Winter is here, son of a. Naruto jolted awake with a hue and cry, bathed in cold sweat. Just a dream, he told himself, fighting to still his racing heart. Just a dream. But his body believed something else and refused to calm itself despite his best efforts. Thrashing upright out of the nightmare, or was it a vision? Fighting not to bolt out of the covers, he struggled to still his harsh breathing and eventually succeeded, of a sort. Slowly, sense reared itself and his dream-hazed vision cleared enough to remind him of where he was. Enough to realize he wasn't alone. With that, he became suddenly and intensely aware of a warm, feminine form nestled against him, firm, pushing against his back. Damn it. He certainly didn't remember that. How much had he drunk last night? Wary, the son of the king rose and risked a glance at his bed companion. Reddish blonde curls interposed themselves over his vision and he felt his heart lurch traitorously. Eleanor. No, not Eleanor. His joy turned to so much ash in his mouth. The face and body were all wrong. She didn't have that crescent-shaped scar on her left, either, and was that a bag of gold on the table? She had to be one of Littlefinger's whores, then. Blue eyes narrowed to thin, angry slits. Out. The word was a growl. The girl stirred blearily. What? Out. Naruto roared and hurled a sovereign in her direction, and she shot out of the bed like a loosed arrow. He had barely enough patience to let her recover her dress before he flung the door open and pushed her through it with a muffled oath. It didn't even occur to him to thank her for the time he felt too wretched to waste time on such false pleasantries. Ulrich shot him a bemused look from his post beside the door. Thankfully he was wise enough to hold his tongue, lest he lose it. Naruto glowered at him a moment longer, uncaring for his ness. Bitter, he slammed the door shut and stormed back to the bed. A snarl escaped him as he flung himself back against the pillows. But somehow this felt meaningless and empty. That woman, he didn't even remember her name, clearly held none of Eleanor's fire. The same fire that had so eluded him after the Battle of Blackwater and their argument. Seven hells, why was she angry with him? So preoccupied was he by these thoughts that he almost failed to notice the insistent pounding on the door. Indeed, he didn't notice it at all until they started knocking most insistently upon the entry to his chambers. What? He croaked hoarsely, squinting against the faint light. A man and a young lady to see ya. The deep rumble of Ulrich's voice answered. Good old Ulrich, still keeping an eye on him after all this. Should I turn him away? Young lady, he didn't know very many of those, these days. The one he did wanted nothing to do with him, given the atrocities she thought he had ordered. And a man, he couldn't fathom who would want to see him so late in the afternoon. Gods, he hoped it wasn't Loris. Having seen the man's hatred for his father firsthand, he knew he'd have to do something about it. The only other one who might want to see him would likely be Robb, no doubt wanting to wring a promise of Sansa's release from him before today's ceremony, as Stannis had been far too busy to attend such matters himself. Propping himself up on an elbow, the prince scrubbed the sleep from his face, raked a hand through the messy mop of his hair and blinked the cobwebs out of his eyes. Let them in, he said. He'd scarcely spoken the words before someone kicked the door in, slamming it against the wall with a loud bang. Sure enough, Robb Stark was first through, his dark eyes bleak, visage stern and cold as winter itself. He wasn't prepared for the sight awaiting him within and thus, came up short. He made the mistake of pausing just long enough to note the blonde's state of undress, and the sight took the wind right out of his sails. The Stark's mouth hung agape like a fish and his cheeks colored fiercely, whatever he'd been preparing to say dying on his lips. The urge to laugh was so overpowering that Naruto found himself forcibly biting his tongue. You'll excuse my lack of decor, he remarked dryly, slipping on a pair of breeches. I wasn't expecting visitors. Robb sputtered, speechless. Was this how everyone behaved in King's Landing? If it's your sister you want, I'll endeavor to return her to you this afternoon. Are you mad? Just a bit. Naruto tactfully ignored the young wolf's question as he slipped a white tunic over his head. A pair of soft footfalls reminded him that he had another party to attend to. The girl, however, was not whom he'd expected. No, not at all. He'd expected Eleanor, all angry green eyes and bright red hair. Not a young brunette in a fine gray gown with caramel-colored eyes and wait a minute. Shireen, for it was his sister indeed, looking most vexed with him. The Elle swept across the room in a blur, skirted around a befuddled Robb and all but pounced upon her brother. Naruto froze, control of his body momentarily stripped away from him. He stood there, rooted, unable to move as those small arms wrapped around his torso. Numbly, he reached down to pat her head. She squeezed him tighter, forcing a wry chuckle out of him. Hey, why didn't you write? Were the first words out of her mouth. I thought you were dead. There was the sister he knew. Bloody relentless. To be fair, I was a bit busy at the time. His eyes cut to Robb. Might I have a moment? For a long moment it seemed as though the Lord of Winterfell might protest, but in the end he relented and allowed himself to be shown out. Northern folk. You simply couldn't pacify them, sometimes. He supposed the fault wasn't Robb's alone. He obviously wanted to return to the north and ready his family for the oncoming winter. Unbidden, Naruto shivered. Winter. What was it about that made him shudder, so? As soon as they were alone, Shireen turned back to him, dark eyes intent. Are you all right? She pressed, questioningly. You look awful. Naruto cringed and sat down upon his bed, suitably chastised. Bad dreams, he muttered, palming his face. Never mind that. What are you doing here? Father brought mother and I to the capital. His little princess beamed, taking her place beside him. He said Dragonstone wasn't safe for us anymore. Besties, she added, he wants to present me to the court with you. Naruto couldn't help but blanch. A wise move, if an uncomfortable one. Not only would Shireen be safer here in King's Landing, but she would be a known quantity to those around her, grayscale or no. The fussy noble types tended to like that sort of thing. More so, Tywin Lannister would be livid at his loss and looking for an excuse to lash out at anyone with Baratheon blood in their veins. And what better way to strike at Stannis to strike at him than by their family? He could care less about Salise and her fanaticism, but the idea of a spiteful Tywin kidnapping his little sister or worse was enough to make his blood run cold. But now she was royalty, which meant she might be married to some crazy ponce or the like. Speaking of crazy, any word on the Red Woman? Shireen's expression turned contemplative. I think father dismissed her. She confessed after a moment of relative silence. They argued after you left and I haven't seen her since. She wasn't with us on the road, either. Tactfully, she left out the possibility that Lady Melisandre might already be here, secreted away somewhere so as not to offend the more religious sort of King's Landing. Her brother's smile was almost too much to bear. Well, that's wonderful. But why are you dressed like that? I told you, father wants to present us to court. She said it as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. He's busy, and I couldn't find mother to do it, so I came to get you. Wait, is that today? A servant bustled in before he could finish. They're waiting for you, my lord. They saw Shireen and hastened to add, my lady. Naruto groaned. Let's not keep the pricks waiting then, shall we? Opening parenthesis ... closing parenthesis. The Red Keep stood in deathly silence. It had changed much since he'd last laid eye on it. Thought he great flaming braziers remained. Stannis had since stripped away all the Lannister banners and finery and replaced them with his own. The ugly red colors had been an eyesore to many, but they were gone at last, allowing the afternoon light to filter into the room, but even then, the light was a faint crimson. Red. He must rather preferred orange, at any rate. Naruto liked to think that they weren't so much nervous as they were afraid, still squirming over the abrupt shift in power, uneasy as to their ultimate fate. Good. The stag and his allies had cast down the lion, wounded it beyond repair. Tywin might still hold Castle Rock, but his forces had been broken, his strength crippled. With his precious legacy held captive, he dared not attack them where they were strongest. Yet neither could he afford to remain idle. He could only stand in open rebellion so long before Stannis decided to destroy him. He hoped it would be soon. It had been some days since the Battle of Blackwater, some time since the dust had settled. Part of him longed to turn and run in the other direction, but he knew it was not to be. He'd lived in the shadows long enough, now and that chapter of his life would soon be over. Though his anonymity had afforded him much, it was time to step into the light. Or barring that, at least make the attempt. But why, in the seven hells, did he have to dress like this? The servants had pressed him into a fiery doublet and pants mirroring his father's colors. It was suffocating. He could hardly move in them, and these frivolous tapestries provided no protection whatsoever. He supposed they were his colors, now. Or soon would be at any rate. Shireen willfully remained by his side in her dark dress, looking positively radiant. At least, Naruto thought so. He couldn't recall whether this might be her first time being brought to court. It was certainly the first time she'd been a princess. She caught his eye and smiled impishly. Behave. You wound me, my lady. Naruto clutched at his heart, then laughed when she elbowed him. All right, I'll be good. Her faux mischief mollified his temper somewhat, and he managed to still his tapping foot as they awaited the last of their guests. As it were, they were nearly swallowed by the crowd, and all the while Naruto silently took a note of whomever cast a scornful glance at them or said a nasty word to his sweet sister, adding them to his list. It helped that none yet knew who they were, for once they did, those feelings would be hidden behind a mask of servitude and fealty. Naruto was almost silently surprised to see so many of the lords and ladies of King's Landing spilling into the Red Keep. Most were unscathed. It seemed his father had been serious when he'd sworn to slay anyone seen raping or pillaging. As ever, H2019 in theory with the death of Gavin filled his heart with no small measure of pride. Some of his little band would no doubt be named lords and ladies in their own right today. Naruto wasn't rightly sure how he felt about that. Men like Ulrich and Mathos might well deserve such a title, and Eleanor certainly, but others. Is that her? Naruto blinked, drawn out of his reverie by the abrupt question. Who? Shireen turned her gaze and Naruto followed after a moment, his eyes falling upon a redhead. Is she the one you're going to marry? Marjorie was a beautiful girl indeed, fairer than Eleanor by far. He supposed he should be grateful to be betrothed to one so fair. Sensing his gaze, the lady turned her head and offered a smile. It even seemed sincere, almost. His own grin felt false on his face, as though it would shatter at any moment. Eleanor had left her mark on him during their brief time together, and it was difficult to shake. He might well come to love Marjorie in time, but even so. I suppose. He grimaced at the reminder that his fate would soon belong to the whims of others. She seems all right. Shireen's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Loris beside her. Oh, he's pretty, she said. Naruto nearly gagged. Oh, my sweet summer child, please don't go there. Please, by all the gods old and new, don't let Shireen be betrothed to that oaf. And thus the prince and princess to be waited in patient silence and observed their father. Watched and waited as honors and titles were doled out in equal measure, glory upon glories heaped upon the victors as those who allied with them. There were many. Esser Davos humbly accepted the title of Master of Esses with no protest on his part. He seemed glad for it. Shireen was certainly pleased to see the Onion Knight elevated to a higher station. Indeed, Naruto believed that he deserved every bit of it, and was pleased to find that Mathos had also been named a lord in his own right. What followed next was a flurry of names and titles, and he struggled to keep track of them all. Honestly, all this pomp and circumstance bordered on the ridiculous. It wasn't as though someone were about to ride a bloody horse into the keep. An odd man named Qyburn brought by Robb Stark to the capital from the ruins of Harrenhal had proved invaluable in treating the wounded of King's Landing and even the king himself. Thus, Stannis decreed him acting maester until a suitable replacement could be found for Pycelle. That would no doubt fly in the face of the Citadel and their pondering old men. Good. A stir followed when Tyrion Lannister was called to step forward next. Freshly shaven and dressed in the colors of his family, he looked every bit the man he was, stature notwithstanding. There was some consternation at his presence here in the keep. That distant buzz turned to outright shock when he was named Hand of the King. Naruto nearly guffawed aloud, such was his glee. Forget the lords and ladies of the court, Tywin would be livid at such a prospect and think his son had played some part in the sack of King's Landing. Robb Stark was declared the Warden of the North and all charge of treason against him were dropped. Sansa was presented to him in short order, and they shared a tearful reunion. Stannis vowed to commit 100 of his men to track down Arya and return her to the north as soon as possible. A noble gesture, and one that surprised Naruto and had Shireen cheering. In turn, Robb presented an exchange of his own. Disheveled and beaten, Jaime Lannister was brought before the throne, clapped in irons. Miraculously, he still had both hands. But there was no life to be seen in those eyes, as many charges were laid before him, no smile on that once proud face. No words or pleas were offered by this shell of a man, nothing but silence. A traitorous flicker of pity sparked to life deep inside of Naruto and he stubbornly quashed it. He'd wrought his own fate, there was no room for regret here. He looks so sad. Shireen murmured. Don't you thin ah. Then her words turned to a gasp. Naruto turned to see what had frightened his sibling so, and nearly gasped himself. Led by no less than 3 armed Stark soldiers on either side, a great giant of a man was dragged into the keep. Drugged and wreathed in countless chains, his face hidden by a black bag, he looked like something out of a child's nightmare until a bold one reached up and yanked the hood away. Confusion gave way to shock, and shock was felled by an arrow of disbelief. In a rare departure from composure, Stannis Baratheon rose up and stood, surveying this great Goliath of a man. Another gift for your grace. Robb announced with a low bow, his countenance grim. To do with as you please. Qyburn, are you certain he's calm? The odd little man nodded sagely. He's in quite the stupor. Naruto whistled. Even a street urchin knew who this man was. He was a terror. A nightmare. A beast in the form of a man. A creature who thrived on violence and delighted in despair and butchered babies in their cribs. The mere sight of him made him draw back and pull Shireen with him, holding her close. This man was a monster. Esser Gregor Clegane. The Mountain. He'd heard in Ping that Tywin's knight had been routed by the Starks, but captured. It must have taken many men indeed. He hadn't thought it was possible for a man to be that large. He even dwarfed Ulrich. What a challenge it must have been to subdue him. If he remembered correctly, the Martells had great reason to loathe this man. They would be glad of this. Very glad indeed, he mused, watching the tottering behemoth as he was led away. I thank you for this gift, Lord Stark. Stannis nodded curtly. We will never forget your service. Consider King's Landing a home to you for as long as you like. Robb took that as his cue to depart, sweeping past Naruto and all but dragging Sansa with him. Somehow the Lady Stark saw him in the crowd, recognized him amongst the throng of lords and ladies. Her eyes widened. Naruto offered her the slightest of smiles and expected to be done with it, but no. Sansa broke away from her brother and darted towards him, much to his dismay. He was wholly unprepared for the curtsy and shy smile. I am in your debt, my lord. Robb stood there, aghast, but his shame paled when faced with Naruto's own embarrassment. Well, you're welcome. He wasn't accustomed to someone actually thanking him in person. His flush lasted until Robb finally recovered enough sense to reclaim his sister and usher her away. Naruto shook his head vigorously to clear it. Damn it, what was it with him and redheads? Shireen was next, and there was much cooing and applause for the clever girl, especially once her grayscale was revealed to be all but cured. Naruto still feared that someone would try to snatch her up and glowered fiercely at Esser Loris to that effect until his sister was once more by his side. Thankfully or not, it was then that his lord father caught his eye and it was finally his turn. Lord Naruto. Step forward. Lord. Since when had he been a lord? Reluctantly, he did so. Your Grace. Stannis was silent for a long moment. Then he stood. Come here, son. Good luck. Shireen whispered to him. Naruto felt the back of his neck burn a fierce red, but reluctantly did as he was bade, leaving his sister with Esser Davos. The crowd murmured wildly. Slowly, carefully, he climbed the steps and stood before Stannis. His father bade him turn to face the Mies, and once more, he obeyed. It felt so strange to be standing above everyone, to look down upon those lords and ladies who had cowered in fear of him only days ago. Of course, not a soul knew that he and the inn were one and the same. And what did it matter if they did? In this moment, he felt invincible, untouchable, immortal. After what felt like an eternity, the long-awaited words washed over him. I, Stannis of the House Baratheon, he began the lengthy list of titles solemnly and with great aplomb. First of my name, rightful king of the Andals and the first men, lord of the 7 kingdoms and protector of the realm, do hereby present to you my son, Naruto Baratheon, your true prince, conqueror of this city, heir to all my lands and titles. Bend the knee to him, as you would me. Scarce had he finished, Then all knelt before them, even the normally recalcitrant Loras. Naruto felt his eyes widen. Lord Mace Tyrell. Stannis called upon the head of the Tyrells next. Naruto gulped. Here it comes. Your house came to my aid in a time of great and terrible need, Stannis continued gravely. Without you or Lord Stark, none of this would have been possible. I am forever in your debt. If you would ask anything of me, ask it. Sir Loras bristled viciously, but remained otherwise silent as his father began to speak in his own slow, pondering way. I beg your pardon, your grace. My dear, sweet daughter, Marjorie, her husband was taken from us before, she remains innocent, free of the usurper's touch. I would ask you to find it in your noble heart to do us the great honor of joining our houses. Ahem, well, that is, I mean to say, he hastened to amend at the king's stony expression, blustering madly, surely you know I do not mean to take you from your wife. Continue. The world was a growl. Would your son then, Mace blustered madly, flailing like a drowning man, do my daughter the honor of taking her hand in most holy matrimony? Stannis paused, pretended to consider it all. Naruto knew it was a foregone conclusion, yet even so, he felt his jaw clench all the same. Is this what you want, Lady Marjorie? Stannis inquired. With all my heart, your grace, she confessed earnestly. I have come to love your son from afar. Her gaze swept to the prince in question, emotion rich in her eyes. Tales of his ferocity and tenacity have never been far from my ears. And those tales have taken root deep inside of me, as I have adored him. Naruto nearly swore. Oh, she was good. She was very, very good. So good he nearly called her out on it. But his father was looking at him now, and he knew better than to protest. He imagined Eleanor looking back at him from the crowd, and felt like a fraud. Nevertheless, he pressed on. Words do not describe your beauty, my lady. I too have heard tales of your beauty and grace, but now that you stand before me, the words tasted false in his mouth, but he did his duty and uttered them all the same. There is no finer rose than you. He even thought that Marjorie flushed slightly. I would be honored to accept your hand in holy matrimony. What followed was nothing short of utter applause. Words of praise and congratulation were heaped upon him in equal measure as he stepped away from the throne, but Naruto heard none of them. The rest of the king's audience paid him by in a haze, Stannis vowing to root out the Ironborn's rebellion in the north, declaring Tywin Lannister an enemy of the crown, and other formalities. Shireen must have seen the distant look on his face, for she didn't press him. Wine. He needed wine to forget all of this awful day and all that happened. This wasn't at all what he'd planned. He'd gotten what he'd wanted. So why did he feel so miserable? When the end finally came and they were given leave to depart, he nearly bolted. Stannis caught his eye, no doubt wishing to speak with him further, but for once in his life, Naruto ignored his lord father. He had eyes only for the door, and safety it would provide. Shireen would be perfectly safe with Davos at her side, so he needn't worry about her for the time being. The whispers were starting again and he just wanted to get the hell away from here before he made a fool of himself or worse. Unfortunately, it was not to be. Your Grace. Naruto's right hand closed around one of the MIV pillars with immense force and squeezed until cracks began to spread from his fingers. He wanted to rip the damn thing off and hurl it across the room. But he didn't dare. Not in this setting, not with his temper so frayed. Absolutely not. Only when he was calm did he permit himself to turn and face the caller. In hindsight, he shouldn't have been surprised at all. Who else would seek to corner him before such a public venue? Any other day, he would have been happy to converse with him. But not now. Anytime but now. Lord Varys. He forced a stiff nod, a smile he didn't feel whatsoever. To what do I owe the pleasure? That was the problem with so many eyes watching. He couldn't simply ignore the man, push him aside and make his way to the door, lest he cause a stir and shame his honor before his father. Damn. He was starting to miss being a bastard already. So, with a supreme effort, he gathered himself up and willed the whispers into silence as best he could. I hear tell, he began slowly, in a low voice that carried only to his ears, that your lord father no longer otiates with Lady Melisandre. Naruto bristled indignantly at the subtle insult. He knew not what hate Varys held against magic, one of the few things he wasn't in the know, but even in this poor state of mind, he refused to let such a jab slide. He saw the challenge for it was and retaliated with one of his own. A war of words, Two could play that game. I've heard the strangest rumors about you, he began pleasantly. Some say you favor the Targaryen girl and wish for her return to the throne. Some might call that treason. To his credit, Varys' only reaction was a mild thinning of the lips. So you do not deny your father's occasion with the Red Priestess? She can burn in all the hells for all I care. It was rare to see the spider surprised, but that was indeed shock that flitted across his face. I beg your pardon, I have no love for the Red Woman and her words. Naruto hissed softly. I'd sooner see her head on a spike. Now, if there's nothing else. I see. So you do. He replied stoically. Perhaps we might speak more of it on the morrow. Varys inquired, the strings of his patience rapidly beginning. Yes, fine. Tomorrow. Now if you don't mind. The Master of Whispers nodded once in farewell. Good day then, Your Grace. Swearing softly, Naruto turned to depart. A moment, my lord. Arg. The quiet purr of a familiar woman's voice drew him up short once more. He turned slowly, dreading who he might find there. Eleanor. Shit. She hadn't forsaken her arms or armor, but the look in her eyes was wholly foreign to him. So was her expression. She'd cut her hair since they'd seen each other last, and though he thought the look suited her, she'd doubtlessly done it for her benefit, not his own. A scroll was pressed into his hand nearly before he realized it. He looked down, wondering at the small piece of parchment and what it contained. His hand fisted painfully around the dry vellum. What's this? She regarded him with a small, sad smile. It was fun while it lasted, my lord. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Naruto felt his heart clench anew. It really was, wasn't it? Whatever the letter contained, it couldn't make him feel worse than this. Some hours later, he was wrong. The letter was worse. Naruto, I cannot be with a man who keeps secrets from me. And you have. You're probably scowling as you read this. Please don't. I don't hate you, and I hope you think the same of me. Nonetheless, I do feel the need to clear the air. Whether or not you gave the Gavin that order no longer matters. You allowed it when you put that man within reach of her, even if you slew him for the crime. Doubtless you think me a hypocrite for saying such things. I hate Lannisters. I always have. That doesn't condone what I've seen. I have seen another side of you, and to be honest, it frightens me. You frighten me. I watched you kill a man like it was nothing, heard you laugh at his screams. Perhaps that is your true face. Perhaps not. Regardless, I have spent many days in thought on this, and I see now that this is the only way. Moreover, I am known to Lady Marjorie, and I doubt she would tolerate my continued presence, even as a consort. You are a prince now, and I am merely a cell sword. I know you will be furious with me. You have a right to be, after all I've done. You will always have my sword, but I'm afraid that I cannot be what you want me to be. Not now. Perhaps someday, I can come to love you again. All of you. I hope you understand. Forever your loyal shield. Eleanor. Rage and disappointment coiled inside of Naruto like a serpent, hissing bitterly. Love. He hated that word. Hated it and all the feelings memory Spain hated invoked. Memories of her, and memories of others. What he'd felt for Eleanor hadn't been love, but he felt in time, it might have been. It could have been different. But of course it wasn't. It never was. Sod it all. Copper for your thoughts. Naruto looked up from the infuriating letter on his desk. Scowling, He crumpled it up and tossed it into the flames of the hearth as his guest looked on. Together, they watched the parchment blacken and curl amidst the fire, folding in on itself until it, and the hated words within were little more than ashes warming the hearth. He did not speak until those awful ashes had finally smoldered away against the burning logs. Only then did he turn his gaze, momentarily annoyed to find the door to his study open. Standing there, was perhaps the last person he wanted to see. I did not summon you, Lord Baelish. You did not, Your Grace, the Master of Coin confessed with a bow, but I felt you required my counsel nonetheless. And what do you counsel? Petter noticed something most strange. Then, when the prince's eyes finally flicked up to him, they were red as rubies. Blood. Red. Slits. You play the game well, my friend, he admitted, stepping further into the room, but not well enough. I am not, the son of Stannis continued slowly, nor have I ever been, your friend. Come now, you've gone from a nameless bastard to the most eligible man in King's Landing, all in less than a fortnight. Lord Baelish smiled softly. Everyone wants to be your friend. Many who served you in the Battle of Blackwater are now lords themselves. And those who displeased you, well, we know their fate. Pray tell, what comes next? In the ensuing silence, he dared to circle the desk, continuing. I suppose you could try and apologize to your little whore, get her recognized as a Redwyn in light of the Seven, though that wouldn't sit well with the Tyrells. Perhaps a better match would. Thunk. Littlefinger blinked, frowning as a dagger thudded into the stone floor near his boot. Was the necessary? Do not, the blonde warned, his voice sharper than Valyrian steel, mistaken my silence for complacency. I've half a mind to cut out that tongue for what you've done. I'm afraid I don't. This time the knife landed dangerously close, something vital. Most vital indeed. You betrayed Ned Stark to his death. Another dagger was already in the inn's hand, ready to fly at the slightest twitch of his wrist. I have half a mind to repay the favor here and now. Perhaps I should, in light of your actions. Tell me what happened of your own volition, he threatened, or I'll have the truth of it with my blade, here and now. For a moment, he thought Baelish would hide behind another half-truth. Imagine his surprise, then, when the man spoke truly. Eddard Stark was a fool. He confessed at last, his dark eyes narrow. An honest and idealistic one, but a fool nevertheless. The words grew hard and flinty on his tongue. He never should have left the north, never made the truth of his plans known to Cersei, never should have shown his hand. He lost the moment those words left his lips. Perhaps, had he held his tongue, he might yet still be alive. What would you have had me do? Die with him? It would have been the honorable thing to do. Naruto answered. But we aren't men of honor now, are we? Baelish challenged, stepping forward in the face of the blade. We are cowards and schemers, the both of us, and we'll do whatever it takes to get what we want. And what do you want? Why, everything, of course, came the winning answer. Everything. You overreach yourself. A small frown drew down the corners of Naruto's mouth. I could call for your head, right here, right now, and no one would bat an eye. But you won't. And why not? Because you need me. Naruto couldn't help himself. Laughter bubbled out of him in a sharp, explosive rush. Petter stared back at him, incredulous, wondering if the boy had gone mad. Naruto supposed he had. But it was either laugh at it all, or tear the entire room apart, and he didn't want to be known for such tantrums. Besides, it was funny. After all this, the man actually wanted his confidence, ha. What I need, Lord Baelish, he finished with a bitter chuckle, are those I can trust. Given your record, you're not on that list. You don't trust me. Better safe than sorry, came the flat reply. What we don't know is usually what gets us killed. A fine saying, Littlefinger quipped. And I still don't trust you. A better one, Baelish conceded. But surely there is something I could do to win your favor. Naruto scoffed. Exasperated, he stood from his desk and glared at the man. You want my trust, he retorted mockingly, the words dripping with sarcasm. Bring me a bloody dragon. In fact, bring me all the gold in Bravos. The knife slammed down on the desk, splitting wood. Perhaps then I might have more faith in your abilities. Littlefinger arched an eyebrow. As you wish. Naruto watched him go, and turned his gaze back to the burning hearth. Those very words would come back to haunt him. And there you have it. Victory for Stannis. What consequences will this have down the line? What repercussions? Expect to see a Baron next chapter. I think it's rather obvious why. Stay tuned to find out. The events of God ought to be quite different with Stannis on the Iron Throne. Will Naruto make it out of this one alive? But the questions don't end here. Now remember that Naruto at the moment has little to nearly no power in this fic beyond his superior strength, stealth skills, and of course, his wit. He's still himself, just hardened. And, in the end there will only be one king upon the Iron Throne, and all bloody hell is about to break loose. So, in the immortal words of Atlas. Would you kindly review the story of this humble man? And enjoy the preview, Vote for the ones you want. Or all three. Preview. Naruto woke suddenly in the night. What are you doing here? Marjorie was silent for a long moment. Then she let go of the dress. Naruto swore softly. By the gods. Daenerys Stormborn certainly lived up to her namesake. She arrived during one of the worst storms King's Landing had ever seen, in that seemed ready to capsize at any moment. Not a prisoner, but not a conqueror either. She radiated defiance and beauty with every step, bright eyes dancing like the storm in which they found themselves. A great bear of a man stood with her. Jorah Mormont, no doubt. And there, a ways behind them, in cages, squeaking their protest. Ah. Littlefinger smiled thinly. Do you believe me now, my lord? You asked for a dragon. I brought you them and their mother. I was being sarcastic. Naruto growled quietly. I thought you knew the difference. We'll see. Thank you for accepting our invitation, my lady. Baelish bowed low as they pair drew near. You honor us with your presence. The last Targaryen scowled. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't kill you now. Naruto beamed. Oh, I like you.